Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Trek Canon. So today, I'm going to be doing a quick video. Well, it might not be quick, but I'm going to be doing a video about the episode Threshold. Now, I'm not going to be talking about the absurdity of the episode as far as what happens and going through a play-by-play, book of what's going on in the episode or anything like that. I'm not even going to do a review of the episode. What I'm going to be doing today basically is talking about the theory of what's happening in that episode and why every time I watch this episode or whenever I think about this episode, I think to myself, did Tom Paris just destroy reality? So, what I'm going to be doing today, hopefully, is going over a little bit of why I think Tom Paris destroyed reality. But because of how the episode was written and the absurdity of the episode, they don't really go into proper Star Trek physics, which closely relates to normal physics in a lot of ways, as to what's truly going on in this episode. What am I talking about? I am talking about the concept and the theory of threshold. What is threshold? Threshold is basically warp 10 or infinite speed. The theory goes on to state that once a person achieves infinite speed or infinite velocity, they can occupy every point in space simultaneously. Let's talk about one of the world's most famous and most important formulas. You guys see I got a whiteboard behind me. Hopefully it reflects right, but I'm gonna try to get it the way it's supposed to. But we finna get into some serious stuff here. No, it's not gonna get broken down into nothing crazy like that. This is just gonna be fun, science, Star Trek science, layman's chat about this episode and the science behind it. And that formula is E equals MC squared. So let's talk about E equals MC squared. People, let's talk about E equals MC squared, where E represents energy or how much power you're putting behind something is equal to the mass of, or how much something has in it, how much molecules, how much of matter makes up something. All right. And C representing the speed of light squared. So whatever that speed is, multiplied by itself. So that's freaking fast. Now, the thing is, we find out in the episode that Tom Paris has achieved threshold. He has broken through that theoretical barrier of infinite speed. So now we have something that looks like this. But what does that actually mean? So I took it through its logical conclusion. All right, so if you're going infinite speed, right? Therefore, whatever you're using to travel at that velocity is therefore infinite as well. And the energy required to move that amount of mass at that amount of speed, which is infinite, is therefore infinite. So everything equates to being infinite. But what does that actually mean? You know, they speak a lot in this episode and what they're doing about velocity. So I would be remiss not to at least touch on a little bit about what they're talking about with velocity, which is basically how fast you got from one place to another using time. My son asked me the other day, he said, Dad, what's the point of math? I have no use for it in my everyday life. And I proceeded to explain to him and prove to him why that particular perspective is the most crazy thing I have ever heard. Most of the things you will learn in math in high school and that you learn in grade school, your brain is hardwired to just reflectively and instinctively use. I would give a lot of examples about that, but that's not the point. We're talking about threshold. Now, basically, if my street math is correct, all right, we already know that he has a velocity that is infinite, all right? If he has a velocity that is infinite, where he is and where he was is no longer relevant. he is everywhere and was everywhere all at the same time. And traveling at that speeds, let's not even mention the extreme levels of engineering and awesomeness that have to go into your main navigational deflector dish, which is responsible for moving everything out of your way so friction of space won't destroy your vessel. It's mostly used to impulse, but it does help do that at warp drive as well. Like moving at that speed should have incinerated him because the navigational deflector dish isn't capable of putting out that much energy, meaning infinite amounts. So let's talk about some of the things that's going on with the propulsion that's used in this episode and why the universe was either destroyed or for some reason, as we see in the episode, it wasn't destroyed. And the first one is warp bubble. Now, we can't talk about what's going on as far as him being everywhere all of the time and for all time without talking about how he's getting there. Now, the first thing I need everybody to understand is that warp drive isn't pushing the ship. It's not an engine that's pushing the ship in the sense of, say, action reaction, like for instance in your engine or in, say, a propeller in a boat. No, it's not. It's nothing like that. Anybody who spent a little time watching Star Trek, and for people who haven't spent time watching Star Trek, let me introduce you to something called the warp bubble. Now, don't talk about my starship, okay? Don't talk about my starship. But as you can see, I have some concentric lines going around this particular starship. And as you notice, they're not even. It's not a pure sphere, all right? At the front of the ship, it's a lot narrower than the back of the ship. Basically, those lines represent how the ship engines are warping space or moving space around it. When that happens, based on how this bubble is formed, space itself moves the ship, shortening the distance between where it's going and where it is. But let's talk about why Trek Canon thinks that using this method in itself would have destroyed the universe. If you and your ship, which is warping space, is everywhere in all of space, that space, therefore, itself would be a warp bubble. Your warp bubble itself would therefore not work. Your ship shouldn't move. But let's say, for instance, it did, as it did in canon in the episode Threshold. It's stated in this episode that Tom Paris was everywhere and seeing everything. All right. Now, if that's the case, his warp bubble was also under those same physics. It existed everywhere, at every point, at every time, in all of reality. If that's the case, he was warping space not only in space itself, but on planets, in ecosystems, around life forms that were starting to develop. Okay, we've seen how that anti-time field worked in the last episode and season of Picard. Well, not Picard, of The Next Generation. Let's not even mention the damage to subspace or areas susceptible to warping that would occur on a universal scale that we first came to realize that was the case in episodes of like Forces of Nature. So then, therefore, let's eliminate the warp bubble as a means of him traveling. Transwarp. You notice in the episode that one of the engines that they decided to use after getting past 9.6, 9.7 was the transwarp engines. They engaged transwarp engines. So, Trek, what's up with transwarp engines? Transport engines. What's up with transwarp engines? What's going on with that? Think of transwarp like this. This is three-dimensional space. All right. Now, basically, a transwarp conduit is opened and the ship travels through it. All right. It's emitted through the main navigational deflector dish in Starfleet vessels. Borg ships are able to use them. All right. And the Voth ships are best at using transwarp conduits. Now, notice I said conduits. Once a transwarp conduit is formed, it's permanently accessible by a ship that knows how to use the frequency and is able to transverse it. After time, a network of these conduits is formed. All right. And that's where you get structures like the Borg transwarp conduit from. The thing about traveling using transwarp is that it breaks one of the fundamental principles of faster than light travel, or light travel, period. The transformation of information. Dangers, therefore, of using a transwarp conduit is strong gravimetric and strong temporal pressures that build up. Now, notice I said temporal pressures, and of course, everybody watching this knows that temporal deals with time. So you have time pressures and you have gravity pressures that build up the faster and longer you traverse transwarp conduits. And like I said, the Voth are even better at deviating or stopping the effects produced by these particular pressures. Now, it's reasonable to assume that these gravimetric and temporal pressures can result in physical or problems for life forms. In Star Trek canon, I believe it is called effects. They reference effects on specifically the DNA and spatial or awareness of all. I believe the term even was used, expansion of awareness. One of the main ways also that the Borg counteract the gravitational or the gravimetric and temporal pressures is through the use of a chronoton field. And you see, that's why I'm one of the biggest proponents of transwarp being both, out of all the situations of propulsion that they could have used, the most deadly aspect of what he did breaking threshold, and the most likely candidate out of all the propositions I'm going to include in this video for the way he destroyed reality. Because overlapping, again, the same way we use the warp bubble, overlapping all of reality in all of space-time, every moment, every distance in a matter stream or in a wormhole would be truly detrimental and catastrophic to the formation and the continued survival of the universe, of reality. So now that gets us into the next theory. Subspace. Was Tom Paris maybe in a level of subspace which separated him from the rest of space, to whereas the things that they say in this particular episode of Threshold can still ring true? I hope that you guys can see this a little bit better. All right, I had to take off the big old super reflective pretty boy light. But anyway, as you can see, this represents our layer of subspace, of space. As you know, there are layers of subspace. All right, Geordi even ended up contacting or breaking into a layer of subspace where aliens start abducting and kidnapping people. All right, but the thing is, the people on the Enterprise, before making that incursion, never knew about that layer of subspace and the people that existed there, and the people there, vice versa. That being said, again, Tom Paris specifically states that he's seen everything and that he was everywhere. That being said, he was on our plane of space, because if he was in any other level of subspace, he never would have experienced any of that. He would have been totally separated from our realm of existence. So what then could there be left? And what haven't I covered that's dealing with what's going on in between the writings, in between the words and sentences of this crazy episode? Only thing that's left is time dilation. All right. We've already talked about him being everywhere at all points of space and time. But let's talk about that. And this is the big thing. Causality. Causality, people. What's causality? Causality is at its basic roots this, then that, then this, then that. All right. Y'all know it as cause and effect. The theory is once you achieve absolute or infinite velocity, then you are now exceeding the transmittal of information. Okay. As such, you violate this, then that, then this, then that. You break down the laws of what's known as reality at the moment. This no longer applies to you. You are now at any state and at all states at the same time. Now, I'm not going to go into why they chose to write him as de-evolving. I chose to think of it as de-evolving, but they chose to say evolving in the episode. They said that his brain was getting bigger, but his appendages was getting smaller. And I guess if you think along the lines of brain mass to body mass ratio, that may still have held to be true. But then what happened to the intelligence? And then why, based on everything that we've seen in canon, choose that amphibious life form instead of how Star Trek has always portrayed the human progression to be? So much so that it's in some theories and in some quarters estimated that the Q are evolved humans. So think of all the things like Tom Paris said in his sentence, but truly think about it. From the beginning of the universe to the end of the universe, every Planck moment in time and in every Planck distance of space, Tom Paris seeing all of that and inhabited every point of space at every point of that time. Therefore, Tom, his starship, his shuttlecraft, his warp field, the energy that he was projecting off of that ship, everything that radiated off of that ship was in essence the entirety of all reality throughout his trip in Threshold. So that's why I say, hey, did Tom Paris really destroy reality in this episode? So I guess in closing, one would have to ask themselves, man, what was the writing in that episode? What was it for? What was the story it was trying to tell? A lot of people have ranked Threshold as one of the worst Star Trek Voyager episodes, if not one of the worst Star Trek episodes. Um, well, it's probably has been pushed off that list with the current new Star Trek, especially in Discovery. But I'm not gonna talk about my stepkids. But it's a lot of varying different reasons why a lot of people have historically seen this episode Threshold as being problematic. Not only because of the evolution and the path that they decided to write with that, with the kids and leaving the kids on the planet, what happened to the kids, and that whole storyline. And I really hope that they don't touch on that in any future Star Trek episode. Just leave it forgotten. You know, not just that nonsense, but the I guess the ramifications or the repercussions of traveling at that speed and what the actual dealings of breaking threshold would be on a universal and realistic scale. So that's what I wanted to say about that episode and my thoughts on that opinion of that episode. So thank you guys for watching. Thank you guys for staying with me for so long. Thank you guys for subscribing. Thank you guys for listening to sometimes the craziest things that I be saying and doing on this channel. But I hope you guys appreciate it. I hope you guys share and like the video. And as always, peace, recycle, and say the whales. You guys be cool.
Frozen to the bone, there's darkness in